Coming down Don Road, there was Miller's the chemist, then Mr. Lakey the saddler. Now, I used to go into Mr. Lakey's place and watch him doing saddles and straps and all that, and skiving leather. It was very, very, I mean, as a kiddie,
You have to think,
I found it very interesting.
your dad was working on cars. Presumably, he used to work on the occasional trap. Did he, for horse and trap? Did he work on those?
He
Or not?
must have worked on all sorts of, because he got all sorts of saddles and
Right.
anything to do with horses, he did, Mr.
Obviously,
Lakey.
this is pre-war. How many horses were there around? Were people using horses very much?
Well, they must have been, because that was the main form of transport in the island.
Yeah.
All the farmers had horse and carts, and they were these long carts with 4 wheels, and they were the steel rimmed wooden spoked wheels, and there were some quite big ones, very, very well painted and lined. A lot of these, they were beautifully done. The farmers were very proud of their horses and their
Did they
carts.
ever have a celebration day? Did they ever have a jamboree or anything with their horse and carts?
No, but if we had a Sunday school picnic,
Right,
we'd all go in a horse and cart,
right.
and we'd go all the way out to one year we went to the Sablador on the 5 Mile Road,
Oh, really?
and had a.
They get the horses back up the hill, because whichever way they came, they had a hell of a hill to come up, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, they always could have a drink, because there's always in Jersey there's always a fountain halfway up the hill,
Right.
and that was for the horses to have a drink, and the horses knew there was water halfway up the hills. And
That's always
you have a look in Jersey, every hill has got a fountain halfway up.
You certainly need them.
Yeah.
Well, it's always fascinating. You see these pictures of these horses collecting seaweed on the beaches.
Yeah. They're pop soldiers.
Big horses. Now, I always think to myself, well, okay, along the flat they'd be okay. They could get them up the slipway possibly. But once they got to hills like Grevdelec Hill or the one at St. Juan's there, how on earth did those horses pull a cart of seaweed up the hill? Bear in mind, it would have been wet and very heavy. How do you think?
No, it's not wet. It's not wet. What the Pop Saunders down here, they used to get all the seaweed and put it into stooks.
Right.
A stook is a big pile of seaweed. It would be 6 to 8 feet high and about 6 to 7 feet in diameter, and it would dry. And so it was dry seaweed they carried.
Did they have the space to do that here? St. Juan's, there was a lot of space on the beach along the field than on the sand dunes. Was it the same here? Was it sand dunes in St. Clement?
Well, Grave Desert, at a nip tide, the tide never came up high enough. They would plan it that they were putting it where the tide would, as the tide receded in the nip tides,
Right.
they got a fortnight for it to dry.
Right.
So in between tides, if you know what I mean.
And was Grevdelec then, was it much of a, because on about now the hospitality as they call it now, but tourism is taking a real hammering. Was there much of a tourism? Because there's quite a few hotels along here, weren't there?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, the Grave Desert Beach was always along the sea wall. There was always people. There was a little cafe. As long as I can remember, there's always been like there's a pizza place there now, but there's always been a little cafe there, and there was always one at Lamar Slip. So there's always been. But the beach was always busy because all us kids, we spent most of our lives on the beach. The beach was where we played. There were hundreds of people on the beach. literally. And then, as I've said, during the war, the Germans were on the beach. They used to enjoy the just sitting on the beach.
How
And
far around did it go? Because if you think like places like Havre de Par, that was obviously designed for a tourism purpose, wasn't it? With the little the swimming pool, and it's got that little Victorian look about it. It looks pretty. It's got little guest houses, cafes, pubs. It was obviously very much orientated towards the tourists. But as you go further along, it's a bit more wild and woolly. There are hotels further along. If you go up to, say, Green Island, would you say it was Green Island? Was that a tourism place?
yeah, oh, yes. On Green Island itself, there, it has eroded away quite a lot, Green Island itself. But when I was a boy, there was what we called the breeder, and it's where they kept crabs and lobsters. Right. The fishermen did in the early parts of the, shall we say, 1900s, and it was ideal as a swimming pool, and all of us kids used to go swimming there on Green Island, and we would also go fishing for mussels and shrimps or anything like that, and sand dealing and all that sort of thing. All along Green Island, there's a lot of fish.
What were people around here doing for work? I mean, there was obviously some were employed in tourism activities, some were running a few cafes, but what else were they doing? Was that because there's not many farms now? Of course, they're mostly gone, but there's still a little farm of Rue de Maupertuis. There's still one there, but there's not many, are there? Were there much more farms?
You must remember the population then was only 40,000, 40,000 people. Right. So you didn't have the industry, and you had cafes, and you had the farms. So as the population increased, so the industries increased.
You're in St. Clement, which you've been most of your life in whilst you've been in Jersey. It's not a very industrial parish, is it, in St. Clement? There's not a lot going on industrially.
Well, there's no industry really in Jersey. If you take the engineering firms, in 1945, I'm going back, you had Axis Supplies, you had Raffries, you had the harbour works. Where the power station is now was the harbour works. And in fact, if you go down to the reclamation there's a bunker there just by the power station, and you pass it on the road, and that was the end of the breakwater. Now the breakwater was at least 100 yards long, and that hit La Collette then, and there was to the side of that was the low cement where nude bathing took place, and that, and there was a La Collette walks that went along. Now you were talking about tourism from where the swimming pool is coming towards the west. There was the hotel there on the corner. I've forgotten the name now, and that's still there now. It's a big hotel. Then you came around the corner. There was a shelter. Then the hotel. Then there was a hotel Marina. There was Billy's Lido. There was the Seymour's Hotel. All of those were like nightclubs, and there was loads and loads of restaurants along there, all in those days. And there were seats all along the walks there. There were seats, and you had a job to find a seat in those days. Auntie Fan used to come on with a wheelchair, and Uncle George, and they used to come there and sit there. and we would Ted Tucker and the family, the Tuckers. We would well, she was Enid Moody in those days, and we would swim at La Collette there on the beach when the tide was up. It was nice, and the rock that's that's off the walks there. It was an ideal fishing place because there was always a lot of mullet there on that rock. And Tim Lane used to catch mullet there, but he used to feed them a couple of days before with Shervy. And Shervy he used to use meat or sandhoppers he used to collect on the beach and feed the fish. And then he'd come the next day, and then they'd all come expecting to be fed, and he'd catch them. Whereas other people would be sitting there with their rods, and they wouldn't get any. But he always came away because he was feeding them what they wanted. The fish, I mean.
Did you ever go fishing? Was that one of your skills?
Pardon?
Was that one of your skills, fishing? Were you ever a fisherman?
No, I didn't. In fact, I was. I went out. Our next door neighbour at the Dean's was a chap called Tony Dames. Tony was a deep sea captain, and he retired from that and went fishing. And I went out in a boat with him, and he always called me. What do you call a sailor that brings bad luck to a ship?
Oh, right, okay. A Jonah.
Eh?
You were a Jonah of some sort.
A Jonah, he called me a Jonah, yeah. So I never went out with him again. So I was a Jonah in a boat. But I had a boat. This was after the war. I had a 14-foot. Well, let me go back.
We're not going to talk after. We're going to come back to after the war because we haven't yet got up to the occupation yet. We're still talking about your childhood, and obviously the occupation is upon us soon. Within a couple of days, you'll be all of a sudden in Jersey. They'll be saying to you, "Oh dear, we're in trouble here. The Germans are arriving." Yeah. Who said that first to you?
I can't really remember at all. But I can remember walking on the beach with my mom and Shirley, and we used to come down the beach often for walks along the beach. I can remember there's some rocks at Lamar, 3 rocks there. I can remember playing in a pool there, trying to catch shrimp in this pool. And there's a rock that's just in front of here. I always used to swim to, and it was only a small rock. It was only about 3 foot high. So it was sort of things that you remember as a kiddie. And
of those people that you went to school with, how many of them do you reckon you still see around now? The ones before the war. When you were at school, do you see any of those people now? Are there any left?
Well, it's quite funny. I spoke to a chap yesterday named Trevor Green, and he'd written an article in the Evening Post, and he actually lived next door to where I'm sitting now, and a house called Belgravia, and I can't actually. He's 3 years younger than me, and so I have difficulty to place him because I used to play with the older boys. That was Billy Burt, Ronnie Burt, and Freddie Davis, Clive Letemplier. All those chaps, but most of them have gone now. See, they're all died younger than me, and that's unfortunate, Just and there was John Reno down the bottom there as well. Yeah.
I was curious because one day, I'm a city boy. Now, you don't see, when you've grown up and you've left school and all the rest of it, you don't see people for years and years because they move away and so on. But I was in a lift in Jersey one day and going up, and an old fella got into the lift. He had his Zimmer frame and he hobbled into the lift. And when we got in the lift, there was already an old fella in there. And they looked at each other and he said, "You're so-and-so, we used to go to school together." And they couldn't remember having met. Now, they were into their 90s. They must have been into their 90s. Now, they hadn't met in this little island in all those years, so it seemed. Isn't it? Wouldn't that to me was extraordinary. But that's possible, isn't it? That can happen.
Well, you talk about that. I was in, I don't know if it was Port Elizabeth or East London, somewhere in South Africa. And I got in a lift with someone and I looked at them and I said, "I know you, I said, your face is so familiar. I can't place you." And the person told me their name, and it was the brother of, it was Mick McDonough's brother, and he lived in Port Elizabeth or East London, and we lived in Bulawayo. And that's amazing how you meet people, and you sort of quickly, you know them.
It is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah,
We're going to stop because we're going to stop. I'm going to make this a separate blog, and then we're going to discuss. We're going to go through the occupation, some things you haven't told us already.
Well, I've still got. Well,
we should no, we save it for the next session because there will have to be more questions.
We'll have a next session. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You go and have a cup of tea.
Cup of tea. Okay. Right.
Well, you drink coffee.
Record.
I know you like your port.
That's disappeared. I'm afraid. Stop recording.
All right.
I'll come back.